Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the last day of National Charter Schools Week for 2021. We're having a discussion on the challenges students face as we continue to recover in DC from the pandemic, and we want to look at the path forward. I'm Dr. Ramona Edelin, Senior Advisor to the DC Charter School Alliance, an advocacy organization that supports and represents the robust charter school sector in the nation's capital. Joining me today are two very special guests. First, we have Mr. Myron Long, who is the founding executive director of the Social Justice School. Also joining us today is Davian Morgan, who is vice president of literacy at Ingenuity Prep and the founder of Hopeful Horizons, a nonprofit that provides academic and social emotional support, as well as community service opportunities for students in DC. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to each of our participants to talk about some of the challenges the students they serve are facing, particularly as we begin what will be a long recovery journey from the pandemic. But first, I want to acknowledge that earlier this week, as part of National Charter Schools Week, Davian was recognized as a 30 under 30 change maker by the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. The 30 under 30 change makers are students, activists, and school leaders from across the country who are having a meaningful impact in their communities in arts, writing, politics, leadership, science, and social justice. Congratulations, Davian. He was honored with this distinction because of his work with students at Ingenuity Prep and with Hopeful Horizons to ensure they have the academic and social emotional skills to thrive in the 21st century as impactful civic leaders. We're very proud of that accomplishment. I'd like to turn it over first to Davian. Can you tell us a little bit about why you founded Horizons and some of the work you're currently doing with your students?
Thanks, Ramona. I started Hopeful Horizons in 2018 after noticing a trend at my school, a trend that exists widely at many other schools across the country, that many of our Black and brown boys were being disproportionately referred for behavior support or suspensions, and were generally performing lower academically, especially in literacy. And we know there's a myriad of reasons of why that could and probably is the case. But from my experience as a teacher, I definitely saw a connection between the two. My boys would struggle in tough moments because of two key reasons. Some were performing below grade level, so they would disrupt the lesson or their peers, or completely disengage as a means of escaping the work, while others didn't have the social emotional capacity at the time to really push through when they became frustrated by rigorous work or by a peer and would consequentially act out. And I just ultimately wanted to create a safe space and a supportive space for what I truly believe is one of America's most vulnerable groups, which is boys of color. So we essentially started a free after-school program at my current school, Ingenuity Prep, with the vision of a more holistic development approach that will provide academic and social emotional support, purposeful mentorship, and opportunities to engage in community building and community service events such as our community cleanups, our canned food drive, and our PD sandwich making drive for those in need. So in 2018, we started with roughly 30 boys, all at my school, but have expanded to include some online programming as of last year as a direct result of the pandemic, including a newly launched program we've named Black Boys Book Bunch that now has reached more than 150 second through sixth graders in DC, Maryland, Virginia, and New Jersey. Black Boys Book Bunch, or what we like to call hashtag BBBB, is a free virtual biweekly book club open to boys of color living in the DC metro area. And again, I wanted to make sure that these boys had the opportunity to continue to build a love of literacy, because we know that they're not going to grow in literacy if they don't love it, but also have the opportunity to read and engage with some really interesting and rigorous texts on their grade level. Many students lost access to those high quality texts once schools stopped in-person instruction, once libraries closed or had limited access, and a lot of students mentioned that they pretty much had no books at home in an at-home library. So with the support of the Walton Family Foundation, 4.0 Schools, the Vela Fund, and a lot of my friends, families, and other supporters, we were able to raise more than $60,000 to ship, at this point, more than 3,000 brand new free books to boys of color that feature main characters of color and cover topics of Black history, Blackness, identity, inclusion, and diversity.
Fantastic. And now we see why you are one of the 30 under 30 in the nation doing this work. Congratulations. And Myron, I want to turn to you next. Your philosophy and vision for the Social Justice School is to catalyze an integrated community of middle school learners to be scholar activists who are designers of a more just world. In order to design a more just world, you educate your students to embrace and live out a set of core beliefs about what it means to be human. Part of this philosophy is to take a whole child, whole family approach to community schooling. That means providing for needs beyond the traditional schooling, things like healthy food options, books, and bicycles, as well as direct access to mental health clinicians. Can you talk about why providing for physical and mental health needs of students is so crucial, especially right now as we continue to deal with the effects of the pandemic?
Yes, thanks for having me, Ramona. Congratulations, brother. Super excited to see, a brother here in DC making that kind of impact, especially as a native Washingtonian. So like Ramona said, we at the Social Justice School really believe that schools should take a holistic approach to teaching and learning. And the reason why we came to that conclusion are for a few reasons. So the first is that, we primarily serve Black and Brown students. And we know that for our Black and Brown students, many of them have experienced or have been connected to social trauma simply because they are Black and Brown people in America. And so it was important for us to make sure that we created the space for our young people to process what that means, especially given, the hypervisibility of violence against Black and Brown bodies that has been occurring in our country. And so we wanted to make sure that our students had the space to actually process how that impacts them as people and as humans first, and then also as learners as well. This year has been a year of mourning, a year of mourning autonomy, a year of mourning connections, and in some cases, many families have lost lives of members of their family. And so we thought it was really important, for the school to be seen as a community school, to be able to provide that access to mental health supports. And we also know that, when we think about our families and education, we're not just talking about our scholar activists. We also want to make sure that we're focusing on the work for our parents as well. And so we extended our, mental health programs to both families and students so they can engage in that work together, and just continue to be able to process how they show up in the world. And then lastly, we really believe that schools should be community schools. And so, when we think about the school as a connector, the school as someone, as an institution that is a living part of the organism of a school, that was really important to us. And so we made a very important decision to direct our to make sure that our budget was aligned to our school mission, so we can provide healthy meals to families during the holidays. We can provide gifts to families who may be in need during those times as well, and making sure again that our families feel like they can bring their whole self to the work. And by doing that, and then being vulnerable and being able to create those connections to be able to show us, we were able to provide those needs to our families.
Thank you, Myron. And if I may say so, the bright vision of the social justice school is another reason why infusing our learning environment with new charter school opportunities is so crucial. How perfect is your philosophy for this particular time, such a time as this?
Thank you, Ramona.
Davian, I want to ask you now about some of the challenges you see for the students we're dealing with, both inside and outside the classroom, and what we can do as educators to support their needs going forward.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things here, some of which Myron already touched on. I think my school is in a very unique place now. We recently restarted our hybrid model. So we have a mix of students who are still learning virtually, the majority of them, but we also brought back a third of our pre-K 3 through fourth grade students in the building recently. And I'm really glad that they've had the opportunity to get some in-person instruction. I think in the classroom, from my experience and from what I've seen and talking to other school leaders, I think some of the biggest issues that we've seen are, especially for the age range that we work with. I'm the vice principal of literacy for our elementary school, so our first through fourth graders, and attention span and attendance has been really tough for our virtual students, which is why I've been so happy to see our students back in the building safely. But even for like a limited amount of hours each day, 6 and 7 year olds, it's really tough for them to really stay engaged the entire day. And our teachers are trying their absolute best to make sure that they stay engaged. But just someone that young, it can get pretty taxing, especially when we thought that this wouldn't last that long. And here we are more than a year later, still on Zoom. But I think that that's definitely been something that has put a weight on kids and their families. I think something else has been consistent communication with families, which I think is related to like more outside issues. We have really strong relationships with our families, but they have a lot going on. We're still in the middle of a global pandemic. They still have jobs. They're worried about childcare. And I just think that going into next year, it's pretty clear that we know that we're going to have a substantially larger percentage of students who are behind that we're used to. We know that we're going to have to focus on a lot of remedial work, but also still like affording kids that opportunity to learn the on grade level work so that we don't create this cycle where we're just remediating work year after year after year and students never actually catch up to where they're supposed to be. I think outside of the classroom, again, like I said, the COVID pandemic we know has disproportionately affected communities of color. Families are worried about food insecurity. They're worried about housing security. They're worried about their own physical and mental health, deaths in the family. And there's just a lot going on. I think in terms of solutions, as teachers and as educators, especially with our youngest kiddos, being mindful of how much time we're on the computer, providing those brain breaks, just feeling in the moment that like, we actually just kind of need to take a break here and I need to just check in to see how folks are doing. Giving directions multiple times or providing, allowing students to submit assignments via like multiple mediums, depending on like how they're feeling that day, where their mental health is at, but also empowering them to take up leadership positions, even if it is in a virtual space, to make kids more invested, especially during this last month where kids can kind of check out in person. So we really don't want them to check out virtually, knowing that it's already been a pretty tough experience for them. I think educators and school systems, if they haven't done so already, are starting to put together resources to share with students and families over the summer, preferably those that are free. Might be reading lists, might be summer camps, online apps, but something that will help to continue to close that gap over the summer so that we can avoid summer slide as much as possible and start school year 21-22 strong. Educators consistently checking in with families, really just seeing if they're really okay. We know that we can send a text message and a family is like, we're good, but finding that time to like check in with families and be like, are you really okay? Is there anything that we can do for you? Because I know that my school and many others have plans and funding in place to support families who have those unexpected needs, but maybe a little bit less willing to speak about them up front. And generally, just encouraging our family and friends to get vaccinated and to take care of their physical and mental health.
Thank you, thank you. And you put your finger on the biggest key, your relationship with the families. So very important. The schools that have been successful have had long-standing relationships with families. They didn't have to create them once we were in the throes of the pandemic. And we congratulate you and thank you for that. I think we all know that while we certainly can envision an end to the pandemic thanks to increasing availability of COVID vaccines, the problems created for our students by instability, loss, and social isolation aren't going to be fixed by just a flip of the switch. Recovery is going to take time, and charter school leaders need additional resources to serve their students. With that in mind, Myron, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about why increased funding in the next budget is absolutely essential for students, particularly those who are designated as at risk.
Definitely. Agree that it is absolutely critical for the pathway moving forward that we increase funding for our schools for next year and beyond. To talk a little bit about social justice schools. So this is our first year as a charter school, and we are a small school by design. To both of your points, we really wanted to make sure that we created the opportunity to have those tight-knit relationships. And we know that size sometimes does impact a school's capacity to do that. However, we still have about 78% of our scholar activists who are considered at risk. And so that means that we have an opportunity to really make sure that we are providing equitable funding for our student population. And so for a small school like ours, who's in their first year in operation, a single site school, having that additional funding will allow us, which brings me to my second point, to sustain the work that we've already begun. We don't want to tell families that, you know, I'm sorry, we can't provide these mental health supports anymore. I'm sorry, we can't provide these bicycles. I'm sorry, we can't provide this food to you all anymore. And the funding that we get will allow us to sustain all of those programs. And then lastly, to me, Ramona, this isn't a question, it's a question about funding and finance, but we have a moral obligation to ensure that we are providing the most resources to the families and students who need it the most. And if we are committed to equity, if we're committed to serving our populations and making sure that our students have choice and have a pathway not only towards academic, but also social justice as well, we have to increase funding for all of our schools and for our most vulnerable populations as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Myron.
Thank you.
I want to thank Davian and Myron for your absolutely crucial work in educating and caring for the needs of your students, and for lending a bit of your time to us today for us to learn about your work. And Davian, congratulations again for being selected 30 under 30 change maker, a national recognition. It's wonderful to see young leaders like yourself using your talents to serve students in the community. Our schools need resources to meet the needs of our students. And that starts with increasing funding in the budget, especially for English language learners and students designated as at risk. We need to make sure our school-based mental health programs are widely accessible and meet the needs of students, families, and staffs. And our facilities need to meet the needs of evolving health guidance. That ends today's discussion. I want to once again thank our guests and thank all of you who are watching from your homes as we explore the challenges facing our students and the path